There is a quiet difference between people who struggle to remember and those who seem to absorb information as if their mind is designed for it. You've seen it before. Someone reads once and recalls with clarity. Someone practices briefly and performs with precision. Someone listens and later explains it better than it was originally taught. It can feel like they have access to something hidden, a different kind of intelligence, a different kind of brain. But the truth is more grounded than that. They are not operating with a different brain. They are operating with a different relationship to learning, and that relationship changes everything. Most people approach learning as an act of effort. They sit down, they try to focus, they repeat, they hope something sticks. Sometimes it does. Often it fades. And this creates a quiet frustration. A belief begins to form that memory is limited, that intelligence is fixed, that some people simply get it and others don't. But this belief is not only inaccurate, it is costly because it stops the real upgrade from happening. The individuals who learn faster and remember longer are not relying on effort alone. They are using patterns, often unconsciously, that align with how the brain naturally works. And when you begin to see those patterns, when you start to apply them deliberately, learning stops feeling like resistance. It starts to feel like momentum. Think about the last time you forgot something important. A name, a concept, something you were certain you understood. It didn't disappear randomly. It faded because it was never fully anchored. While most information is introduced to the brain in a fragile state, it is temporary, unstable, easily replaced. Without reinforcement, the brain assumes it is not important, so it lets it go. This is not failure. It is efficiency. Your brain is constantly filtering. It decides what to keep and what to release, based on patterns of attention, repetition, emotional relevance, and connection. If something doesn't meet those conditions, it tends to fade. Not because you are incapable, but because the signal was too weak. Now consider the opposite. Think of something you remember vividly. A moment, a conversation, a skill you practiced enough to feel natural. Why does it stay? Because it crossed a threshold. It became reinforced, connected, meaningful. Your brain marked it as worth keeping. This is where the shift begins. That fast learners are not simply taking in more information. They are strengthening the signal. They are creating conditions where information is more likely to stay. And once you understand that, you stop asking, why can't I remember? You start asking a different question. How do I make this easier to remember? That question changes your behavior. It shifts your attention from effort to strategy. And strategy compounds, because learning is not just about what you study. It is about how you interact with what you study. Two people can read the same page. One forgets it within hours. The other recalls it days later. The difference is not the page, it is the process. The first person reads passively. The second engages, not dramatically, not forcefully, but deliberately. They pause, they reflect. They connect new ideas to existing ones. They may not even realize they're doing it, but their brain does. And the brain responds accordingly. It begins to encode more deeply. This is where speed begins to emerge, because faster learning is not about rushing. It is about reducing friction. When information is structured in a way your brain prefers, when it is connected, revisited, and applied, it doesn't need to be forced. It moves more smoothly. You understand quicker, you retain longer, and over time this creates a visible gap. Not because you became fundamentally different, but because your approach became more aligned. There is also another layer that often goes unnoticed. Emotional state. Many people try to learn while distracted, stressed, or mentally scattered. They push through anyway. Why? But the brain is not neutral in those moments. It becomes less receptive. Attention weakens. Encoding becomes shallow, and later, when recall fails, it feels confusing. But it follows a pattern. The state you are in while learning influences how well you remember. Calm focus tends to support clarity. Overwhelm tends to disrupt it. This doesn't mean you need perfect conditions, but it does mean awareness matters, because when you begin to notice your state, you gain the ability to adjust it. And that adjustment improves learning without increasing effort. Now, here is something that often changes how people see memory entirely. Forgetting is not the opposite of intelligence. In many cases, it is part of the process. When information fades, it creates an opportunity to rebuild it, stronger, more connected, yet more accessible. This is why revisiting material at the right time can be more powerful than initial exposure. The first encounter introduces the idea. The second strengthens it. The third begins to anchor it. Each repetition, when spaced correctly, signals importance. And the brain responds. It allocates more resources. It stabilizes the memory. This is not about endless repetition. It is about timing. Because when something is reviewed just as it begins to fade, the reinforcement becomes more effective. This pattern is used, often intuitively, by people who retain large amounts of information. They don't wait until everything is forgotten. They revisit before it disappears completely. This keeps the signal alive, and over time it becomes durable. Another shift begins to happen here. You stop treating memory as something that either works or doesn't. You start seeing it as something you can influence, shape, strengthen. And this sense of influence is important because it builds consistency. You begin to trust the process, not blindly, but through observation. You notice that when you engage more deeply, you remember more. When you space your repetition, recall improves. When you connect ideas, understanding becomes clearer. These are not random outcomes. They follow patterns. And once you see those patterns, you can use them. This is where learning becomes more than a task. It becomes a system you can refine, a system that improves with use. And over time, something subtle but powerful happens. Your identity begins to shift. You no longer see yourself as someone who struggles to learn. You begin to see yourself as someone who understands how learning works. That shift changes your behavior. You approach new information with more clarity, less hesitation, more intention. And that intention compounds. Because each time you learn effectively, you reinforce the belief that you can. This belief is not based on empty confidence. It is built on experience. Repeated, observable experience. And that makes it stable. Now, it is important to stay grounded here. No method removes effort entirely. No approach makes every concept instantly clear. There will still be moments of confusion, moments where progress feels slow. But the difference is in how those moments are handled. Instead of assuming limitation, you adjust the approach. You refine the process. You stay engaged. And over time, those adjustments reduce friction. They make learning smoother, more efficient, more consistent. So the question is no longer whether your brain can improve. It is how you choose to work with it. Because the potential for faster learning and stronger memory is not reserved for a few. It is available to those who align their behavior with how the brain naturally operates. And that alignment is something you can build step by step, without pressure, without force, with awareness, with intention, with consistency. This is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming more effective, more deliberate, more aware of how you learn and how you can improve that process over time. Because once you begin to upgrade that relationship, everything built on top of it starts to change. Your focus sharpens. Your recall strengthens. Your confidence stabilizes. And gradually, without needing to announce it, you become someone who learns differently, someone who retains more than before, someone who understands more deeply, someone who moves forward with clarity instead of doubt, not because you changed your brain overnight, but because you learned how to work with it. And that is where the real upgrade begins. The hidden mechanics of learning. There is a pattern beneath everything you have ever learned. It is quiet. It does not demand attention, but it shapes how information enters your mind and whether it stays. Most people never notice it. They focus on the surface, reading more, watching more, trying harder. And while effort has its place, it is rarely the deciding factor. Or because learning is not controlled by effort alone. It is governed by structure. The structure of attention, the structure of understanding, the structure of memory. And when that structure is weak, even strong effort produces limited results. But when that structure becomes clear, even moderate effort begins to create powerful outcomes. So, the question is not how much you are trying. The question is how your learning is structured. Let's begin with attention. Attention is often treated as something simple. Either you have it or you don't. But in reality, attention has depth. There is surface attention, where you are present but not fully engaged. And there is deep attention, where your mind actively processes what it encounters. Most learning fails at the surface level. You read the words, you hear the explanation, but you move forward. But nothing truly settles, because attention was present, but not invested. Deep attention works differently. It slows down just enough to notice patterns. It asks quiet questions. It looks for meaning rather than just information. This does not require intensity. It requires intention. A slight shift from finishing the material to understanding the material. That shift alone begins to change how the brain encodes information, because when attention deepens, the signal strengthens. And when the signal strengthens, memory becomes more likely. Now, here is where many people unintentionally limit themselves. They assume understanding comes from repetition alone. So they read something multiple times, hoping clarity will emerge. But repetition without engagement often leads to familiarity, not understanding. You begin to recognize the words. But recognition is not the same as recall. Recognition is passive. Recall is active. And the brain treats them differently. Fast learners tend to move quickly from recognition to recall. They don't stay in the comfort of rereading. They test their understanding. Not formally, not with pressure, but with small, deliberate pauses. They ask themselves, can I explain this? Can I recall the main idea without looking? Can I connect this to something I already know? These questions activate the mind. They turn learning into a process, not just an exposure. And this activation strengthens memory, because the brain remembers what it works with, not just what it sees. Now consider connection. The brain does not store information in isolation. It builds networks. Each idea is linked to others, and the strength of those links influences recall. If something stands alone, it is fragile. If something is connected, it becomes stable. This is why isolated facts are easy to forget. But concepts tied to existing knowledge tend to last longer. Fast learners, instinctively or deliberately, create these connections. They relate new information to what they already understand. Sometimes it is simple, a comparison, an example, a mental image. But that small act creates a bridge. And once that bridge exists, recall becomes easier, because the brain has multiple pathways to reach the same idea. Now, let's move deeper. There is a moment in learning that often goes unnoticed. And it is the moment when something shifts from confusion to clarity. At first, the idea feels unclear. You follow along, but it doesn't fully make sense. Then suddenly, something clicks. That moment is not random. It is the result of alignment. Your brain has gathered enough pieces and arranged them in a way that makes sense. But here is the important part. That clarity can fade if it is not reinforced. Many people experience understanding and then move on too quickly. They assume the idea is secure, but without reinforcement, it remains unstable. Fast learners pause at that moment. They recognize the shift, and they strengthen it. They restate the idea in their own words. They apply it in a small way. They revisit it shortly after. These actions do not take much time, but they increase the likelihood that the idea will stay. This is where learning begins to compound, because each reinforced idea becomes a foundation for the next. And as these foundations grow, new information has somewhere to attach. This reduces effort over time, because you are not starting from zero. You are building on structure. Now consider pacing. There is a tendency to rush through material, to cover more in less time. But speed without absorption leads to repetition later, and repetition without structure leads to frustration. Fast learners often appear quick, but their speed comes from efficiency, not haste. They move forward when something is clear enough, not just when it is finished. This distinction matters, because learning is not measured by how much you cover. It is measured by how much you retain and can use. So instead of asking, how fast can I get through this? The better question becomes, how well do I understand this before I move on? This does not slow you down. It prevents the need to go back repeatedly, which over time makes you faster. Now, let's address something subtle but important: mental resistance. There are moments when learning feels heavy. You sit down and your mind drifts. You try to focus, but it feels forced. This is often interpreted as a lack of discipline. But in many cases, it is a signal that something in the process needs adjustment. Maybe the material is too dense without breaks. Maybe the environment is distracting. Maybe the approach is too passive. Fast learners notice this resistance. They don't ignore it, and they don't overreact to it. They adjust. They simplify the task. They change the method. They take a brief pause and return with intention. This keeps momentum intact, because resistance is not always something to push through. Sometimes it is something to work with. Now, let's explore retention more directly. Memory strengthens through use, not just repetition, but active use. When you apply an idea, even in a small way, you deepen its presence. This could be explaining it to someone else, writing it in your own words, using it in a real situation. Each active use reinforces the memory, because the brain begins to see it as functional, not just theoretical. And functional information is more likely to stay. This is why teaching, even informally, can be so powerful. It forces clarity, it reveals gaps, and it strengthens understanding. Now, none of this requires exceptional ability. It requires awareness. Awareness of how you engage, how you process, how you reinforce. And once that awareness is present, you begin to make small adjustments. Those adjustments seem minor at first, but they accumulate. You start to notice that you remember more than before, that concepts feel clearer, that learning requires less repetition. And over time, this builds confidence, not in a vague sense, but in a grounded, observable way. You trust your process. You trust your ability to learn, and that trust reduces hesitation. You approach new material with more openness, more curiosity, less doubt. This matters more than it appears, because hesitation often slows learning. It creates friction before you even begin. But when you trust your process, you move forward more smoothly. Now, let's bring this together. Learning is not a single action. It is a sequence. Attention leads to understanding. Understanding leads to connection. Connection leads to retention. Retention strengthens future learning. Each step influences the next. And when one step is weak, the chain is affected. But when each step is supported, the entire process becomes stronger. This is the hidden mechanics, not complicated, but often overlooked. And once you begin to see it, you can work with it, deliberately, calmly, without pressure. Because this is not about forcing change. It is about aligning with what already works. And when you do that consistently, learning begins to feel different. Less like effort, more like progress, less like uncertainty, and more like clarity. And gradually, without needing to prove anything, you become someone who learns with structure, someone who remembers with intention, someone who improves not by chance, but by design. That shift is quiet, but it is powerful, and it is only the beginning. Why some minds move faster. There is a moment, often subtle, when learning either accelerates or begins to slow down. It doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it appears as a slight hesitation, a pause that lingers a little longer than expected, a sense that something is not fully connecting. Most people move past this moment without noticing it. They continue reading. They continue listening. They continue consuming information. But something important has already happened. The mind has lost alignment. And when alignment is lost, speed is affected. Not because the brain has slowed down, but because the process has become inefficient. This is where the difference begins to show. People who learn faster are not simply moving quickly. They are maintaining alignment more consistently. They notice when something doesn't fully make sense. They sense when clarity is incomplete. And instead of pushing forward blindly, they adjust. Not with frustration, but with awareness. This adjustment keeps the process clean. Because speed in learning is not about rushing ahead. It is about reducing the need to go back. Every time you move forward without clarity, you create a hidden cost. You may need to revisit the same idea later. You may need to relearn what felt familiar but was never solid. This creates repetition that feels exhausting, not because repetition is ineffective, but because it is unstructured. Fast learners reduce this cost. They invest slightly more attention at the point of confusion, and that small investment often prevents larger delays later. This is how speed begins to emerge. Not through intensity, but through precision. Now, let's look deeper at how the mind organizes information. When you encounter something new, your brain does not treat all parts equally. It prioritizes patterns. It looks for structure. It searches for relationships between ideas. If it finds them, understanding becomes smoother. If it doesn't, the information feels fragmented. And fragmented information is harder to retain. This is why some explanations feel clear immediately, while others feel scattered, even if they contain the same facts. Or the difference is structure. Fast learners often rebuild structure as they learn. They don't rely entirely on how the information is presented. They reorganize it internally. They group ideas. They simplify relationships. They create a mental framework. This framework acts as a guide. Instead of remembering isolated details, they remember how those details fit together. And this makes recall faster, because the brain can follow the structure, rather than searching through scattered pieces. Now, consider another layer. Decision-making during learning. Every time you study something, you are making small decisions. Where to focus, what to ignore, when to move on, when to pause. Most of these decisions happen automatically, but their quality affects your results. If you move on too early, understanding remains shallow. Or if you stay too long on minor details, momentum slows. Fast learners develop a sense of balance. They know when something is clear enough to proceed. Not perfect, not complete in every detail, but stable enough to build upon. This balance keeps learning fluid, because perfection is not required at every step, but clarity is. And knowing the difference between the two is a skill. Now, let's talk about mental energy. Learning is not just a cognitive process, it is also an energy-dependent process. Your ability to focus, process, and retain information is influenced by how your mental energy is managed. When energy is low, attention becomes scattered, understanding becomes slower, memory becomes less reliable. Many people try to push through this. They continue studying even when their mind is fatigued. Sometimes this works temporarily, but often it leads to diminishing returns. Fast learners tend to respect this limit, not by avoiding effort, but by managing it. They break sessions into manageable segments. They take pauses before fatigue becomes overwhelming. They return with renewed focus. This keeps the quality of attention high. And quality matters more than duration, because 1 hour of focused, structured learning often produces more retention than several hours of distracted effort. Now, let's move into something more subtle: expectation. The way you expect learning to feel influences how you experience it. If you expect everything to be immediately clear, confusion feels like failure. If you expect difficulty to be part of the process, confusion becomes a signal to adjust. Or this shift in expectation changes your response. Instead of resisting confusion, you work with it. You slow down. You reframe the idea. You approach it from another angle. And this often leads to deeper understanding, because clarity is not always immediate. Sometimes it builds gradually, layer by layer. Fast learners tend to accept this. They do not interpret temporary confusion as a limitation. They treat it as part of the process. And this keeps them engaged. Now, consider the role of curiosity. Curiosity is often misunderstood as something spontaneous, something you either feel or don't. But in learning, curiosity can be developed. It can be directed. When you approach material with a sense of inquiry, even a simple one, your engagement increases. Instead of passively receiving information, you begin to interact with it. You look for answers, you notice patterns, you anticipate what comes next. This interaction strengthens attention, and stronger attention improves memory. Fast learners often maintain a quiet form of curiosity, not exaggerated, not forced, but present. They are interested in how things work, why they are structured a certain way, what connections exist beneath the surface. This interest deepens processing, and deeper processing leads to stronger retention. Now, let's address something that often creates unnecessary pressure: the idea that fast learners never forget. In reality, everyone forgets. The difference is in how forgetting is handled. Fast learners tend to revisit information strategically. They do not wait until everything is lost. They return while the memory is still partially active. This makes reinforcement more efficient, because rebuilding a partially active memory requires less effort than starting from zero. This is where consistency matters, not intensity. Consistent, well-timed review strengthens memory gradually, and over time this creates durability. So when it appears that someone never forgets, what you are often seeing is a system working in the background, a system of review, connection, and application. Now, let's bring attention to environment. Where and how you learn influences how well you learn. A cluttered environment can divide attention. Frequent interruptions can disrupt focus. Even subtle distractions can reduce depth of processing. Fast learners often create conditions that support focus, not perfectly, but intentionally. They reduce unnecessary distractions. They create a space where attention can settle. This does not require complete isolation. It requires awareness of what interferes and small adjustments to minimize it, because attention, once interrupted repeatedly, takes time to rebuild, and protecting it improves efficiency. Now, consider the role of self-perception. How you see yourself as a learner influences how you behave. If you believe learning is difficult for you, you may approach it with hesitation. You may expect struggle before you begin. This expectation can reduce engagement, not consciously, but subtly. Fast learners often carry a different perception, not necessarily that learning is easy, but that it is manageable, that it can be improved, that their approach matters. This belief encourages experimentation, adjustment, persistence, and over time, these behaviors lead to better results, which then reinforces the belief, creating a positive cycle. Now, none of this suggests that learning becomes effortless. It still requires attention. It still requires time. It still involves moments of difficulty. But the difference is in how those moments are handled, with structure, with awareness, with a system that supports progress. And as this system develops, speed becomes a natural outcome, not forced, not rushed, but earned through alignment. You begin to understand faster because your process is clearer. You retain more because your engagement is deeper. You move forward with less friction because your structure supports you. And gradually, this creates a noticeable shift. You are no longer overwhelmed by new information. You are not dependent on repeated exposure without strategy. You are working with your mind instead of against it. That is what makes the difference. Not talent alone, not effort alone, but the way those elements are organized. And once that organization improves, your learning begins to change in ways that feel steady, reliable, and increasingly effective. This is how some minds appear to move faster. Not because they are rushing, but because they are aligned. And alignment over time creates speed. Memory is built, not found. There is a common assumption that memory is something you either have or don't. That some people are naturally good at remembering, while others struggle no matter how hard they try. But this assumption overlooks something important. That memory is not a fixed trait. It is a process. And like any process, it can be shaped, refined, strengthened over time. The people who seem to remember effortlessly are not relying on chance. They are building memory deliberately, sometimes without even realizing it. And once you understand how that building happens, you begin to participate in it. Instead of hoping something stays, you begin to create the conditions that make it more likely. Let's begin with a simple, but often overlooked, truth. Memory does not begin at recall. It begins at encoding. Encoding is the moment information first enters your awareness, and the quality of that moment determines everything that follows. If encoding is shallow, recall becomes difficult. If encoding is strong, recall becomes more accessible. Most people underestimate this stage. They assume that if they just revisit information enough times, it will eventually stick. But repetition cannot fully compensate for weak encoding, because if the foundation is unclear, each repetition reinforces confusion, not clarity. So, the first shift is this: slow down at the beginning, not dramatically, just enough to ensure that what you are taking in is understood. Not perfectly, but meaningfully. Ask yourself, what is this actually saying? How does this fit into something I already know? What is the core idea here? These questions deepen encoding. They move the information from surface exposure into active processing, and that shift makes memory more likely. Now, once information is encoded, it enters a fragile state. It is present, but not stable. Without reinforcement, it begins to fade. This is not a flaw. It is how the brain manages capacity. It filters continuously and only stabilizes what appears important. So the next step is reinforcement. But not all reinforcement is equal. Passive review, like rereading, can create familiarity. But familiarity can be misleading. You recognize the material, but that does not mean you can recall it independently. Active reinforcement works differently. It requires retrieval, trying to remember without looking, reconstructing the idea in your own words, testing your understanding, even briefly. This effort signals importance to the brain. It tells the system, this matters. And in response, the brain strengthens the memory. This is why recall practice is so effective. Not because it is difficult, but because it engages the system directly. Now, there is a moment during recall that is especially valuable. The moment of slight struggle. Not complete confusion, but effort. When you almost remember, but not instantly. This moment often leads to stronger memory formation, because the brain is actively working to retrieve the information, and that work reinforces the pathway. So, instead of avoiding that moment, it can be useful to allow it, to sit with it briefly, to give your mind the opportunity to retrieve, and then, if needed, review. This balance between effort and support strengthens retention. Now, let's explore spacing. Spacing is one of the most reliable ways to improve memory, but it is often misunderstood. It does not mean repeating something many times in one session. It means revisiting it over time, with intervals in between. These intervals allow partial forgetting to occur. And when you return to the material, the act of recalling it again strengthens the memory more deeply. Each spaced repetition acts like reinforcement, not identical to the first, but stronger, because it builds on what remains. Fast learners often use this pattern intentionally or intuitively. They revisit material after a gap. Not too soon, not too late, just as it begins to fade. And this timing makes the process efficient, because each review has a greater impact. Now, consider another layer, variation. When you encounter information in slightly different forms, your understanding becomes more flexible. You see the idea from multiple angles. This strengthens memory, because it is not tied to a single context. For example, reading a concept, and then hearing it explained differently, then applying it in a small way. Each variation reinforces the same core idea, but from a different perspective. This creates multiple pathways for recall, and multiple pathways increase reliability. Now, let's move into something deeper, meaning. The brain tends to prioritize information that feels meaningful, not necessarily emotionally intense, but relevant, connected, useful. When something has meaning, it is more likely to be retained. This does not mean every piece of information is naturally meaningful, but meaning can be created by asking, why does this matter? Where could this apply? How does this relate to something I care about? These questions do not change the information itself, but they change how you interact with it. And that interaction influences memory, because meaning strengthens attention, and attention strengthens encoding. Now, let's talk about overload. There is a limit to how much new information the brain can process effectively at once. When too much is introduced too quickly, clarity decreases. Connections weaken. Memory becomes unstable. Many people try to overcome this by increasing effort, but often the more effective approach is adjustment, breaking information into smaller parts, allowing time for processing, returning to material with fresh attention. Fast learners tend to manage input carefully, not by avoiding complexity, but by pacing exposure. They allow understanding to build gradually, and this prevents overload. Now, consider consolidation. After learning, the brain continues to process information. It organizes, strengthens, and integrates what has been encoded. This process often happens during rest, when the mind is not actively focused on new input. This is why breaks can be valuable, not as avoidance, but as part of the process. Stepping away allows consolidation to occur, and when you return, understanding can feel clearer. Memory can feel more stable. Fast learners often include these pauses, not because they lack discipline, but because they understand the rhythm of learning. Engage, pause, revisit, reinforce. This rhythm supports retention. Now, let's address something subtle. Confidence in memory. When you believe you can remember, you are more likely to attempt recall. When you doubt, you may rely on reviewing instead. This reduces retrieval practice, and over time, it weakens memory. So building confidence is not about certainty, it is about willingness. Willingness to try recalling, to engage with the material actively, to test your understanding. This willingness strengthens memory because it increases interaction. Now, bring all of this together. Memory is built through a sequence. Clear encoding, active recall, spaced reinforcement, meaningful connection, managed input, consistent engagement. Each step supports the next. And when this sequence is followed imperfectly but consistently, memory begins to improve, not instantly, but steadily. You start to notice that information stays longer, that recall becomes easier, that learning requires fewer repetitions. And this changes your experience. You no longer feel like you are constantly starting over. You feel progress accumulating, and that accumulation builds momentum. Now, it is important to remain realistic. No system removes forgetting entirely. No method ensures perfect recall, but the goal is not perfection. It is improvement. More retention than before, more clarity than before, more confidence than before. And as these improvements build, you begin to trust your memory, not because it never fails, but because it works more often, more reliably, more predictably. And that trust changes how you learn. You engage more actively. You revisit more strategically. You apply more consistently. And over time, this creates a powerful shift. You are no longer hoping to remember. You are building memory deliberately, calmly, effectively. And that changes everything that comes next. Because once memory becomes something you can influence, learning becomes something you can expand. And that expansion continues. The discipline of focus in a distracted world. There is a quiet battle taking place every time you try to learn something new. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. But it is there, between what deserves your attention and what attempts to take it. In earlier environments, attention had fewer competitors, fewer interruptions, fewer signals competing for your awareness. Now, attention is constantly being pulled in different directions. Messages, notifications, background noise, internal thoughts, each one small. But together, they create fragmentation. And fragmented attention weakens learning, because learning requires continuity. Or a steady line of focus long enough for ideas to connect. When that line breaks repeatedly, the process resets. You return, but not to the same depth. And over time, this creates the illusion that learning is difficult, when in reality, the structure of attention has been disrupted. So the question becomes, how do you maintain focus without forcing it? Because force rarely sustains attention for long. It creates tension, and tension often leads to fatigue. The answer begins with awareness, noticing when attention drifts, not reacting harshly, but recognizing it. This recognition is subtle, but it matters, because you cannot guide what you do not notice. Fast learners tend to develop this awareness. They sense when their mind moves away from the material, and instead of ignoring it, they gently bring it back. Not aggressively, not with frustration, but with intention. This repeated return strengthens focus over time, because attention, like memory, is shaped by use. Now, let's explore the nature of distraction. Distraction is not always external. Often it comes from within. A thought about something unfinished, a concern about something ahead, a memory that surfaces unexpectedly. These internal distractions can be just as powerful as external ones, and trying to eliminate them completely is not realistic. but managing them is possible. One approach is containment, acknowledging the thought briefly and setting it aside, not suppressing it, but choosing not to follow it immediately. This keeps the learning process intact, because attention is not lost, it is redirected. Now, consider environment. Where you place yourself influences how easily attention settles. A space filled with constant interruptions makes sustained focus more difficult. A space with fewer distractions supports continuity. This does not require perfection, but small adjustments help. Reducing unnecessary noise, organizing your workspace, creating a clear area for learning. These changes signal to your mind that this is a place for focus, and over time, this association strengthens. Now, let's talk about duration. Many people assume that longer sessions lead to better results, but attention has natural limits. After a certain point, quality decreases. Focus becomes shallow. Processing slows. Continuing beyond this point often leads to reduced efficiency. Fast learners tend to work within these limits. They focus intensely for a period, then pause before fatigue sets in. These pauses are not interruptions. They are part of the process. They allow attention to reset. So, when you return, focus is sharper. This cycle, focus, pause, return, maintains quality, and quality supports retention. Now, let's examine intention. Before you begin learning, your mind benefits from direction. A simple question: what am I trying to understand here? This question sharpens attention because it gives your mind a target. Without a target, attention spreads. With a target, it narrows. And narrow attention processes information more deeply. Fast learners often begin with this clarity. They are not just going through material. They are looking for something specific, and this makes their focus more efficient. Now, consider another layer, or monotony. When material feels repetitive or unengaging, attention tends to drift. This is natural. The brain seeks variation. But abandoning the material is not always the solution. Instead, changing your interaction with it can help. Asking different questions, explaining it aloud, connecting it to something else. These shifts re-engage attention because they introduce variation, and variation sustains interest. Now, let's move into something deeper. Cognitive load. This refers to how much information your mind is handling at once. When cognitive load is too high, focus becomes strained. Understanding weakens. Memory becomes less stable. Managing this load is essential. Breaking complex ideas into smaller parts, focusing on one concept at a time, allowing space for processing. These actions reduce strain. And when strain decreases, attention becomes more stable. Now, consider the role of physical state. Your body influences your mind more than it may appear. Fatigue, tension, and discomfort can reduce focus, while a calm, alert state supports it. Simple factors like posture, breathing, and rest can influence how well you concentrate. Fast learners often pay attention to this, not in an extreme way, but with awareness. They notice when their state is affecting their focus, and they adjust. This keeps the learning process supported. Now, let's address something often overlooked: recovery. After periods of deep focus, the mind needs time to recover. Without recovery, attention becomes less reliable. This does not mean stopping completely, but allowing lighter activities, moments of rest, time away from intense input. These periods restore mental energy, and when energy returns, focus improves. Now, bring this together. Focus is not a constant state. It is a cycle. It strengthens with use. It weakens with neglect. It improves with awareness. And most importantly, it responds to how you treat it. When you respect its limits, when you guide it gently, when you create conditions that support it, it becomes more reliable, more stable, more effective. And as focus improves, learning changes. You understand more in less time, You retain more with less repetition. You experience less frustration because your attention is aligned with your intention. Now, it is important to stay balanced. No one maintains perfect focus at all times. Distraction will still occur. Moments of drift will still happen. But the goal is not perfection. It is consistency, returning to focus more often than you lose it. And over time, this consistency builds strength, because each return reinforces the habit. Each moment of awareness improves control. And gradually, without forcing it, your ability to focus becomes more dependable, more natural, more integrated into how you learn. This is the discipline of focus. Not rigid, not harsh, but steady, intentional, and quietly powerful. Because when attention is stable, everything else becomes easier. Understanding deepens. Memory strengthens. Learning accelerates. Not through pressure, but through alignment. And that alignment is something you can build, one moment of focus at a time, turning knowledge into skill. There is a point in learning where information stops being enough. You understand the concept. You can recognize it. You can even explain it. But when it comes to applying it, something feels incomplete. This is the gap between knowing and doing. And it is where many people slow down. Not because they lack intelligence, but because the process has not moved far enough. Understanding is essential, but on its own, it remains theoretical. Skill is built when understanding is used, when ideas move from the mind into action. And that transition changes everything, because the brain treats applied knowledge differently. It becomes functional, relevant, worth keeping. So the question becomes, how do you move from understanding to skill? The first step is translation. Taking an idea and expressing it in your own words. Not repeating what you heard, but reshaping it. This forces clarity, because if something is unclear, it becomes visible when you try to explain it. Fast learners often do this naturally. They restate ideas, they simplify them, they adapt them to their own thinking. This is not just communication, it is processing, and processing strengthens understanding. Now, once an idea is clear enough, it needs to be used. Not in a complex way, but in a simple, direct way. Application does not have to be perfect. It just needs to exist. A small example, a basic exercise, a simple implementation. These early applications create familiarity. They move the idea from abstract to practical. And this shift is important because practical knowledge is easier to recall. Now, there is often hesitation at this stage, a tendency to wait until something feels fully mastered before applying it. Why? But this delay can slow progress. Because mastery is built through use, not before it. Fast learners tend to apply early, even when their understanding is incomplete. They accept that initial attempts may be imperfect, but they use those attempts to refine their understanding. Each application reveals something, a gap, a misunderstanding, a detail that was overlooked, and these insights guide the next step. This creates a feedback loop. Learn, apply, adjust, repeat. And with each cycle, skill improves. Now, let's explore feedback more closely. Feedback is information about your performance. It shows what is working and what needs adjustment. Without feedback, progress becomes uncertain. You may repeat the same mistakes without noticing, or miss opportunities to improve. Feedback does not always need to come from others. It can come from observation, from comparing your results to a standard, from reflecting on what happened. Fast learners often seek feedback actively. They look for signals. They pay attention to outcomes, and they adjust accordingly. This keeps their progress aligned. Now, consider repetition. Repetition is essential for skill, but not all repetition is effective. Repeating something the same way, without adjustment, can reinforce habits, but not necessarily improvement. Effective repetition includes refinement. Each attempt is slightly improved, a small correction, a clearer approach, a better understanding. This makes repetition dynamic, and dynamic repetition builds skill more efficiently. Now, let's talk about variation. Once a basic level of skill is established, variation becomes important. Applying the same idea in different contexts, facing slightly different challenges, adapting to new conditions. This strengthens flexibility. Because skill is not just about performing one version correctly. It is about adapting to different situations. Fast learners often introduce variation intentionally. They test their understanding in new ways, and this deepens their capability. Now, consider the role of patience. Skill development takes time, not because the brain is slow, but because complexity builds gradually. There are stages: initial understanding, early application, refinement, consistency. Each stage requires attention. Rushing through them can create gaps, but staying too long in one stage can slow momentum. Balance is important, or moving forward when ready, but allowing enough time for stability. Now, let's address something subtle: frustration. When applying new knowledge, mistakes are likely. This can create frustration, a sense that progress is slower than expected. But frustration, when managed, can be informative. It highlights where attention is needed, where understanding is incomplete. Fast learners tend to respond to frustration with adjustment, not avoidance. They look at what caused the difficulty. They refine their approach, and they continue. This keeps progress moving. Now, consider consistency. Skill is built through repeated engagement over time, not in a single session, but across many. Consistency creates familiarity, and familiarity reduces effort. What once required concentration becomes more natural, more automatic. This is where speed increases, not because you are forcing it, but because the process has become efficient. Now, let's bring in reflection. After applying something, taking a moment to reflect can strengthen learning. What worked? What didn't? What could be improved? These questions create awareness, and awareness guides future attempts. Without reflection, experience can pass without improvement. With reflection, each experience becomes a lesson. Now, consider identity. As you build skill, your perception of yourself begins to shift. You start to see yourself as someone capable, not in an exaggerated way, but in a grounded, observable way. This perception influences behavior. You approach challenges with more confidence, you engage more actively, and this reinforces growth. Now, bring all of this together. And turning knowledge into skill is a process. Understand the idea. Translate it into your own words. Apply it in simple ways. Observe the results. Adjust your approach. Repeat with refinement. Introduce variation. Maintain consistency, reflect, and improve. Each step builds on the last. And over time, this process creates capability, not instantly, but steadily. Now, it is important to remain realistic. Skill development includes setbacks, moments where progress feels slow, moments where results are inconsistent. But these moments are part of the process, not signs of failure. With consistent application and adjustment, improvement tends to follow, gradually, reliably. Now, imagine the long-term effect. Each concept you learn becomes something you can use. Each skill you develop supports the next. Learning becomes cumulative, not scattered. And this accumulation changes your experience. You are no longer collecting information. You are building capability. And capability creates confidence because it is based on action, on results, on experience. Now, the shift becomes clear. Learning is not complete when you understand something. It is complete when you can use it, when it becomes part of how you think and how you act. And once you begin to operate this way, your progress accelerates, not because you're moving faster in a forced way, but because each step builds on the last, creating momentum, sustainable, consistent, and increasingly effective. This is how knowledge becomes skill, and skill becomes strength. So the identity shift, that changes everything. There is a point in this journey where the techniques begin to fade into the background, not because they are no longer useful, but because they become integrated. What once required effort becomes natural. What once felt deliberate becomes automatic. And at that point, something deeper begins to shift. Your identity, not in a dramatic or exaggerated way, but quietly, consistently. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone trying to learn better, but as someone who does. This shift matters more than any single method, because identity influences behavior at a deeper level. It shapes what you expect from yourself, how you respond to difficulty, how consistently you show up. When your identity aligns with your actions, effort becomes more sustainable. Because you are no longer forcing behavior that feels unfamiliar. You are reinforcing behavior that feels natural. But this shift does not happen all at once. It builds through evidence, small, repeated experiences that confirm a new pattern. You remember something more easily than before. You understand a concept more quickly. You apply an idea with more confidence. Each of these moments is subtle, but together, they form a pattern. And the mind notices patterns. It begins to update its internal model. This is how I operate now. That statement may not be spoken, but it is felt. And once it is felt, behavior begins to align with it. Now, there is something important to understand here. Identity is not something you declare. It is something you demonstrate through action, through consistency, or through repeated engagement. Fast learners do not become effective because they claim to be. They become effective because their habits support that identity. And over time, the identity becomes stable. Now, let's explore how this identity is built. It begins with awareness, recognizing that your approach to learning can change, that you are not fixed in your current patterns. This recognition creates possibility. Without it, change feels limited. With it, adjustment becomes realistic. The next step is intentional action. Applying the principles you have learned, not perfectly, but consistently. Engaging with material more deeply. Using recall instead of passive review. Spacing your repetition. Applying what you learn. Each action reinforces the process, and each repetition strengthens the pattern. Now, as this continues, feedback begins to appear. You notice improvements, not in every moment, but often enough to recognize a shift. This feedback is important because it confirms that your approach is working, and confirmation builds confidence. Now, confidence here is not about certainty. It is about trust. Trust in your process. Trust that your efforts are aligned. This trust reduces hesitation. You approach new material with less doubt, more clarity. And this changes your experience. Now, let's address something that can interrupt this process. Comparison. Looking at others and measuring your progress against theirs. This can create unnecessary pressure because learning paths vary. Different backgrounds, different experiences, different starting points. Fast learners tend to focus on their own process, not ignoring others completely, but not relying on comparison as a measure. They track their own improvement, and this keeps their attention where it matters. Now, consider consistency. Identity is reinforced through repeated behavior, not occasional effort, regular engagement. Even when motivation is low, even when progress feels slow, these moments matter because they strengthen the pattern. They signal commitment, and commitment stabilizes identity. Now, let's explore resilience. There will be moments where learning feels difficult, where understanding takes longer than expected, where recall is not as strong. These moments can create doubt, but they do not define the process. Fast learners tend to respond with adjustment. They refine their approach, they revisit the fundamentals, they continue. This persistence maintains momentum, and momentum supports identity. Now, consider the long-term effect. As your identity shifts, your approach to learning becomes more efficient. You engage with clarity. You process with structure. You retain with intention. And over time, this creates a compounding effect. Each new concept builds on a stronger foundation. Each skill supports the next. Learning becomes cumulative, and this accumulation accelerates progress. Now, it is important to stay grounded. This shift does not remove all challenges. There will still be complex topics, moments of confusion, periods of slower progress. But the difference is in how you respond, with structure, with awareness, with a system that supports you. And this makes challenges manageable. Now, let's bring attention to discipline. Not rigid, not harsh, but steady, showing up consistently, engaging with intention, following through on your process. Discipline supports identity because it reinforces behavior, and behavior shapes perception. Now, consider reflection, taking time to notice your progress, to recognize improvements, to identify areas for adjustment. This awareness keeps your process aligned, and alignment supports growth. Now, bring everything together. The identity of a fast learner is not defined by speed alone. It is defined by approach, by structure, by consistency, by awareness. These elements create efficiency, and efficiency creates the appearance of speed. But beneath that appearance is a system you can build. Now, imagine what this looks like over time. You approach new material with clarity. You engage deeply. You recall more easily. You apply what you learn. You adjust when needed, and each cycle strengthens the next. This is not dramatic. It is steady. And that steadiness creates reliability. Now, consider the impact beyond learning. This identity influences other areas. Problem solving, decision making, adaptability, because the same principles apply. Clear thinking, structured approach, consistent refinement. These qualities extend beyond study. They shape how you interact with challenges, how you process information, how you grow. Now, as this becomes integrated, you no longer think about each step consciously. The process becomes intuitive. You know when to pause, when to reflect, when to apply. This intuition is built through experience, through repetition, through consistent engagement, and it becomes a quiet advantage, not visible at first glance, but evident in results. Now, it is important to remain balanced. This is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming more effective, more aware, more aligned with how you learn best. And that alignment is what creates change. Not instantly, but over time. Now, pause for a moment. Consider how you approached learning before, and how you approach it now. Even small shifts matter, because they accumulate, and accumulation creates transformation. Now, the path forward becomes clear. Continue applying what works, refine what doesn't, stay consistent, stay aware, and allow the process to build. Because this is not a temporary adjustment. It is a long-term shift, one that continues to develop, one that supports everything you choose to learn. And as this identity strengthens, you no longer wonder if you can learn faster. You begin to experience it, not as a sudden change, but as a steady improvement, reliable, grounded, sustainable, and quietly powerful. The upgrade is already in motion. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when everything you have been doing begins to connect, not in a sudden, dramatic realization, but in a quiet sense of clarity. You sit with something new, and it feels more familiar than it used to. You recall an idea, and it arrives with less effort. You apply something, and it works more smoothly than before. Nothing extraordinary has happened in that moment, and yet something has changed. Because the upgrade you were looking for was never a single technique. It was a shift in how you relate to learning itself. And that shift is already in motion. You have seen how attention shapes understanding, how structure reduces friction, how memory is built through engagement, not chance, how skill emerges from application, and how identity forms through repeated action. These are not isolated ideas, they are connected, each one reinforcing the next. And when they begin to operate together, learning starts to feel different. Not easier in the sense of requiring no effort, but clearer, more predictable, more aligned. You are no longer approaching information passively. You are engaging with it, shaping it, working with it in a way that supports retention and use. And this changes your experience. You begin to notice patterns where there was once confusion. You begin to move forward with less hesitation. You begin to trust that your effort is going somewhere. That trust matters because it keeps you engaged. It reduces the urge to give up when something feels difficult. It allows you to stay with the process long enough for results to appear. Now, it is important to recognize something here. This is not a transformation that depends on perfect execution. You do not need to apply every principle flawlessly. You do not need to optimize every moment. Progress comes from consistency, not perfection. From applying these ideas often enough that they begin to influence your default behavior. Some days will feel focused and clear. Others may feel scattered. That variation is part of the process. What matters is returning to intention, returning to structure, returning to engagement. Each return strengthens the pattern, and each repetition reinforces the shift. Now, consider how this applies over time. Weeks pass, months pass. You continue learning new topics, new skills, new ideas, but you are not starting from the same place each time. Your foundation is stronger, your approach is more refined, your awareness is sharper, so each new challenge becomes slightly more manageable. Well, not because the material is easier, but because your process is stronger. This is how progress compounds, quietly, gradually, but reliably. Now, imagine the long-term effect. You are exposed to a new concept. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, you begin to organize it. You identify the structure. You connect it to what you already know. You engage with it actively. You revisit it at the right time. You apply it. And over time, it becomes part of your understanding. This sequence becomes natural, not something you have to force, something you do. And as this continues, learning becomes less of a task and more of a capability. Something you can rely on, something that supports your growth across different areas. Now, there is another layer to this: patience. Not passive waiting, but steady commitment. Understanding that meaningful change builds over time. That improvement may not always be visible immediately, but it is happening beneath the surface. Each time you engage deeply, you strengthen your ability to do so again. Each time you recall, you reinforce your memory. Each time you apply, you build skill. These moments accumulate, even when they seem small, even when they feel ordinary. So because consistency turns ordinary actions into meaningful change. Now, it is also important to remain grounded. There will still be challenges. Complex topics, moments of uncertainty, periods where progress feels slower. But these are not interruptions. They are part of the process. And your response to them determines your direction. If you return to structure, if you adjust your approach, if you stay engaged, progress tends to continue. Now, let's bring attention to something simple. Awareness. The ability to notice what is happening in your learning process. To recognize when attention drifts, when understanding is incomplete, when reinforcement is needed. This awareness allows you to adjust, and adjustment keeps the process effective. Without awareness, learning becomes reactive. With awareness, it becomes intentional. Now, as you move forward, you do not need to carry everything at once. You do not need to remember every principle in detail. What matters is the direction. A shift toward engagement, a shift toward structure, a shift toward consistency. These shifts guide your behavior, and behavior shapes results. Now, pause for a moment. Consider how you approached learning before, and how you approach it now. Even small differences matter, because they influence every future interaction with information. Now, think ahead. The next time you encounter something new, a concept, a skill, a piece of information, you will approach it differently. You will engage with intention. You will look for structure. You will connect it to what you know. You will revisit it strategically. You will apply it. And this process will support you, not perfectly, but consistently. Now, over time, this consistency builds something valuable, confidence, not based on assumption, but based on experience. You have seen yourself learn. You have seen yourself improve. You have seen the process work. And that confidence changes how you move forward. You approach challenges with more clarity, less hesitation, more willingness to engage. And this reinforces the cycle. Now, remember this. The goal is not to become someone who never forgets. The goal is to become someone who knows how to remember better, who understands how learning works, who can adjust their approach when needed. This is more sustainable, more realistic, and more powerful over time, because it gives you control over the process. Not absolute control, but influence. The ability to guide your learning, to improve it, to refine it. And that influence is what creates change. Now, as we come to a close, there is one final perspective to hold. This is not a destination. It is a direction, a way of approaching learning that continues to evolve, that improves with experience, that adapts to new challenges. And as you continue, you will refine your process further. You will discover what works best for you. You will adjust based on your needs. And this personalization strengthens the system. Now, the upgrade you were looking for. It is not something you install. It is something you build through attention, through engagement, through consistent action. And once you begin building it, it continues to develop, supporting everything you choose to learn, everything you choose to understand, everything you choose to become more capable in. This is where the real change happens. Not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of many, quiet, intentional, consistent, and over time, powerful.